Boy buys bouquet of flowers daily. Cashier follows him and breaks down in tears. Imagine walking into a flower shop every single day, and without fail, you see the same boy. He's about 12, with dark skin, always dressed neatly, and there's something about his presence that tugs at your heartstrings. He's quiet, doesn't say much, but the way he picks out flowers, carefully, thoughtfully, makes you wonder. He takes his time, gently inspecting each bouquet as if every petal holds a secret. Then, he walks up to the counter with the same bunch of roses, pays, and leaves without a word. For weeks, the cashier, a young woman named Sarah, watches him. At first, she thinks it's sweet, a boy buying flowers regularly. Maybe it's for his mom. Maybe it's a small crush at school. Or perhaps he's just someone who appreciates the beauty of flowers. But there's something off, something unspoken, about the whole situation. Why does he buy flowers every single day? Who are they for? And why does he never seem happy? Even when leaving with a fresh bouquet, Sarah can't shake the feeling that something deeper is going on, something she's not seeing. After a while, the boy's routine starts to haunt her. He doesn't fit the picture of a kid casually buying flowers for fun. His movements are too precise, his face too serious. He's never in a rush, but there's always a sense of urgency in the way he clutches the flowers to his chest. Every day, without fail. One evening, Sarah decides to strike up a conversation, hoping to get some insight. "Who are these for?" she asks, trying to sound casual. The boy simply looks at her, his eyes reflecting a sadness she can't quite place. "They're important," he replies quietly, before walking out the door. Now Sarah can't stop thinking about him. The mystery gnaws at her. She feels an overwhelming need to understand. Who is this boy? What's driving him to buy these flowers every single day? What's his stories? After weeks of watching in silence, she finally makes a decision. She's going to follow him. She needs to know where these flowers are going. One afternoon, after the boy buys his usual bouquet, Sarah discreetly locks up the shop and trails behind him. Keeping her distance, she follows him through the bustling streets, her heart racing with both curiosity and a sense of dread. The boy walks with purpose, cutting through alleys and side streets she's never ventured into before. The path seems familiar to him, as if he's taken it hundreds of times. As she follows him farther away from the shop, the city noise starts to fade. They reach a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, and soon enough, they're in a secluded park. Sarah's chest tightens as she realizes they're heading toward a small, overgrown cemetery tucked away at the edge of the park. The boy walks directly to one specific grave, and as he kneels down, Sarah's breath catches in her throat. She watches from behind a tree, heart pounding. He places the bouquet gently on the grave, his hands trembling slightly, and then he sits there for a moment in silence. She can't hear what he's saying, but she can see his lips moving, soft words spoken to the earth beneath him. His shoulders slump, and it's as if the weight of the world is pressing down on him. Sarah feels a lump in her throat. She hadn't expected this. Not this. And then, as she steps closer, trying to get a better view, her heart shatters into 1,000 pieces. The name on the gravestone is one she recognizes, but it's not the name that breaks her. It's the small inscription beneath it. She suddenly understands everything, and in that moment, she can barely hold back her tears. But that's where we'll leave it for now. What could Sarah have discovered at the cemetery that moved her so deeply? Why has this boy been buying flowers for this particular grave every single day? Stay tuned, because the answers are coming, and they will change everything you think you know about this story. You won't want to miss what happens next. Sarah stood frozen at the edge of the cemetery, her eyes fixed on the boy as he knelt beside the grave. She hadn't planned on feeling this way. Heart heavy, throat tight, like she was intruding on something sacred, but she couldn't tear herself away. She glanced at the name on the gravestone again, a name she'd seen so many times, but hadn't connected until now. It was his mother. The inscription beneath it read, "A loving mother, gone too soon." Everything started to click into place. The boy's silence, the sadness in his eyes, his daily visits to the flower shop. He wasn't just buying flowers. He was holding on to a connection, a memory that was slipping away a little more each day. Sarah's heart ached for him, but she didn't know what to do, how to help. How could she? She was just a cashier who barely knew him. Yet the boy's pain felt so real, so raw. It was like a weight she was suddenly carrying with him. She watched as he whispered to the grave, his fingers tracing the carved letters of his mother's name. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, it felt like the world had paused. Allowing this boy to grieve in peace, Sarah wanted to turn away, give him his privacy, but something inside her wouldn't let her leave. She'd followed him this far. She needed to understand, needed to know more. The next day, Sarah went back to work with a new sense of purpose. When the boy came in, just like he did every day, she watched him more closely. His face was calm, but now she could see the exhaustion behind his eyes. It was the kind of tiredness that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much emotional weight for too long. Sarah knew she had to approach him, but carefully. She didn't want to push too hard. "Hey," she said softly, as he handed her the bouquet, the same roses he picked every day. "How are you doing?" He didn't answer right away, just shrugged, as if the question didn't have an easy answer. Sarah waited, hoping he'd open up, even just a little. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently, unsure if he would respond. The boy looked down at the counter, his fingers fidgeting, with the few crumpled bills he was using to pay for the flowers. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's for my mom," he said. "She liked roses." Sarah nodded, her chest tightening. She didn't want to ask too much, but she couldn't help herself. "Is that why you come every day? To bring her flowers?" He nodded again, his eyes still downcast. "I have to. It's like, if I don't, she'll forget me. Like she'll disappear." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. This boy, who barely looked old enough to understand loss, was carrying the unimaginable weight of keeping his mother's memory alive. The daily flowers were his way of holding on to her, even though she was gone. Sarah didn't know what to say, didn't know how to make it better, but she knew one thing: he couldn't keep doing this alone. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began to subtly insert herself into the boy's routine. She didn't pry, didn't ask too many questions, but she made sure he knew she was there. She'd ask how he was doing, offer him a small smile when he came in. And once, she even slipped a note into the bouquet, a simple message that read, "You're not alone." She wasn't sure if he ever saw it, but it made her feel like she was doing something, no matter how small. But as the days passed, Sarah noticed something else. The boy was getting more withdrawn. His face, once just sad, now seemed etched with something darker. Fear, maybe, or anger. He didn't linger in the shop like he used to. He came in, bought the flowers, and left as quickly as possible, barely making eye contact. One day, after he hurried out, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't keep watching this kid spiral deeper into whatever he was dealing with. She needed to help him, even if he didn't ask for it. So once again, she followed him. This time, though, something was different. Instead of heading straight to the cemetery, the boy took a different path, one that led Sarah deeper into a part of town she didn't recognize. Her heart raced as she followed at a safe distance, trying to stay unnoticed. She had no idea where he was going or what she was about to uncover, but the tension in the air was thick, and it felt like something big was coming. Finally, the boy stopped in front of an old, run-down house. Sarah hid behind a tree, watching as he knocked on the door, his small frame looking even more fragile in front of the towering structure. The door creaked open, and an older man appeared, rough-looking, with dark circles under his eyes. The boy handed him the bouquet, and Sarah's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about his mom. There was something else going on, something more complicated, more painful. The man said something to the boy, too low for Sarah to hear, but the way the boy flinched told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a friendly exchange. As the boy turned to leave, his face pale and his hands shaking, Sarah knew she had to step in. She didn't know what she was getting herself into, but she couldn't stand by anymore. Whatever was happening, whatever this man's role was in the boy's life, it wasn't right. She was about to take a step forward, ready to intervene, when the boy looked up and saw her. His eyes widened, filled with a mixture of shock and fear. For a moment, they just stood there, locked in silence, both of them knowing something had to change, but not knowing how. And just like that, the world seemed to hold its breath. What would Sarah do? What was really going on with this boy and the man at the door? And more importantly, how would it all end? Stay tuned, because the truth is about to come out, and when it does, nothing will ever be the same again. The boy stood frozen, eyes wide, fear etched across his face. Sarah's heart pounded as they stared at each other. She didn't know what to say, what to do, but she knew she couldn't just leave him there, not after seeing what she had. The rough-looking man in the doorway hadn't noticed her yet, but she could tell that whatever was happening between him and the boy wasn't good. Before Sarah could take a step forward, the man's voice broke the silence. "What are you waiting for?" he growled, his voice cold. The boy flinched again and quickly turned back toward the man, nodding as he hurriedly shoved his hands into his pockets. Sarah saw it then, a flash of desperation in the boy's eyes. He wasn't just buying flowers for his mother's grave. There was something much darker, much more painful, happening behind the scenes. The boy handed over the crumpled money he had in his pocket, and the man snatched it out of his hand with a grunt. Sarah's stomach twisted. This man was using the boy, forcing him to buy flowers, to keep up some kind of routine that didn't make sense yet, but was clearly tearing the boy apart. And suddenly, it all clicked. The flowers weren't just for the boy's mother. They were for something else, something this man was making him do. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward. "Hey!" she called out, her voice shaking but firm. The boy's head snapped toward her, eyes pleading with her to stop, to go away, but Sarah couldn't turn back now. The man looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw Sarah approach. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone harsh, as he stepped out onto the porch, squaring his shoulders. "I work at the flower shop," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've seen this boy come in every day, and I've seen what's going on. He doesn't deserve this. Whatever you're doing to him, it stops now." The man let out a low chuckle, but it wasn't the kind that eased tension. "You don't know anything about what's going on here," he said, his voice laced with menace. "This boy owes me." Sarah's breath caught. "Owes you? He's just a kid. What could he possibly owe you?" The man's eyes darkened. "His mother owed me a lot of money before she died, and now I'm collecting." He nodded toward the boy, who stood frozen, his face pale with fear. Sarah's heart broke at the words. The boy wasn't just mourning his mother. He was trapped in a cycle of debt, paying off something he could never have possibly owed. And every day, he'd been coming into her shop, buying those flowers, probably hoping it would end somehow, that maybe he'd find peace. No, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. This stops now. You can't do this to him. He's a child. You can't hold him responsible for his mother's mistakes. The man took a step closer, but Sarah didn't. Back down. She knew she was in over her head, but she couldn't leave this boy to suffer any longer. Just as the man opened his mouth to speak again, something unexpected happened. The boy stepped forward, standing between Sarah and the man. No, the boy said quietly, but there was a strength in his voice that hadn't been there before. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. The man's face twisted in anger. But before he could react, Sarah placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, giving him the reassurance he needed. You don't owe him anything, she said softly. We'll get you help. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The boy nodded, his eyes filled with tears, but there was a newfound resolve in him. The man stood there, looking between Sarah and the boy, his expression dark, but Sarah could see something shifting in him too. Maybe it was the realization that the boy was no longer going to be controlled by fear. Maybe it was something deeper, something the man didn't expect to feel. But whatever it was, he stepped back, his grip on the situation slipping. This isn't over, the man muttered. But Sarah knew it was. She wasn't going to let the boy go back to that life. She'd already made up her mind. She'd call the authorities. She'd get the boy the help he needed. And most importantly, she'd make sure he never had to face this alone again. They walked away from the house. Sarah felt the tension slowly leave her body. The boy walked beside her, his shoulders still slumped but lighter somehow, like a huge weight had been lifted off him. For the first time since she'd met him, he wasn't holding on to those flowers like they were his lifeline. He was just a boy again, not trapped in someone else's debts, not haunted by fear. I'm sorry, he said quietly as they walked, about everything. You don't have to apologize, Sarah said softly. None of this was your fault. The boy nodded, his eyes still filled with unshed tears. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I kept doing what he wanted, it would get better. But it never did. Sarah gave him a gentle smile. You don't have to do that anymore. We're going to figure this out, okay? You're not alone. As they made their way back to the shop, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. The boy had started as just a quiet customer, buying flowers every day, but now he was more than that. He was someone who had found his voice, someone who had taken the first step toward healing. And as they walked together, Sarah knew that things were going to be different for both of them. In the end, it wasn't just about the flowers. It was about the connection, the hope, and the strength it took to break free from the past. And as the boy glanced up at her with a small, grateful smile, Sarah realized that sometimes, even the smallest actions, like buying a bouquet of flowers, could lead to the biggest changes.